Do it from exponential potential to not being able to pay for the rental or even a bill from the dental. Now how's that for your mental? I've been through hard times too. The situation demand I bring the hard rhymes through. That's why I'm all times too. Half past despicable.
In this episode, 175 years of Comanche history is on the table in a complicated fight against the inevitable. The Fantasy Flight retrospective continues with a look back at Eric Lang's towering masterpiece, Chaos in the Old World. Plus, I wanted to know how a publisher that specializes mostly in tabletop miniature wargames teamed up with the British Library to make a cooperative family game about remixing fairy tales for points and laughs. One of the designers hopped on the line and told us. All that and more, right after some more of this intro music by Dow Jones and Dio the Fabulous Drifter.
Fabulous drifter, twisted your sister in the Sierra Vista. I don't need to spit 16 to split your crew. I hit the block, lean, spit 2 when you're through. Oh, you a gangster rapper, only record I got is the one that's wrecking your block. So get off my jock, cause you know, and I know that my flow's terrific. So
You're here, you made it. It's episode 115 of Breakup Gaming Society, a podcast for board game freaks, RPG burnouts, refugees, hip-hop junkies. I am your host, the Colonel Hector Bravado in Starkville, Colorado. Here's what we're dishing up in this one. Games of the Week. Here my initial overview of Comanchería, which is finally on the table. This game models 175 years of the conflict in the interior U.S. West from the perspective of the Comanche. I got the first scenario set up, which takes place in the 1700s. Please join me for a tour of the board and its many, many actors. If you're in the mood for a lovely family diversion, we've got you covered there too. After that, Walt and I are going to talk to Orc Cradle Studios co-designer Robin Cruddas of the family game Mix Up Fairy Tale. Lastly, I take you back to a summer night in Portland. That was the last time I ever got to play Chaos in the Old World, Fantasy Flight Game's asymmetrical masterpiece of the age. I won the game, but I was about to lose everyone at the table. Gonna tell you that story. And give you an overview of the game if you never played it. It's wonderful. You're never going to get a copy. Track of the week. I've been spinning Cool Keith alter ego Dr. Doom's First Come, First Serve LP all the time. This led me to the small but scintillating discography of Motion Man, a talented Bay Area underground journeyman with gobs of style and technique. My goal here is to put him somewhere on your playlist. Also, if you love the song Dwick by Gangstar featuring Nice and Smooth, which I know you do, check out our show sponsor, Doghouse Riley. The Doghouse took one of my favorite Guru lines from that track and put it on a t-shirt, along with other fun designs like a Lego head recreation of the Watchman icon. I put the link to the online shop in the show description. So, you ready for the main dish? You hear that oncoming sizzle like a platter of fajitas making its way to your table? It's Games of the Week. Let's dig in, shall we?
bitch, I kicked it, yup, I kicked it. Come on, you couldn't bang with this if your name was Genghis Khan.
My increasing fascination with historical games and detailed systems that let me explore pockets of history I don't know enough about, or know anything about, have led me to Comanchería, the rise and fall of the Comanche Empire from GMT Games. My most recent experience with this kind of game was Vijayanagara, the Deccan Empires of medieval India, which I loved so much I played it all summer long on Rally the Troops against Dave from the Dude Take Your Turn blog and Michael of the Board Games Chronicle. By the way, if either of you cats are listening, I'm always down for another one. Learning Vijayanagara's system and educating myself a bit about its era got me watching gangs of YouTube videos about coin and ICS system games, daydreaming about getting neck deep in everything from the Cuban Revolution to Robin Hood. Okay, Robin Hood was fictional, but it was an asymmetrical conflict, so GMT has a two-player title that models that too. Want to play against your friends as the cartels or paramilitaries during the 90s cocaine war in Colombia? How about trying to pacify Afghanistan? There's a fun weekend project. Or maybe you'd rather take a side during the fall of Roman Britain. There's a juicy conflict somewhere on this menu for you. So, ever since hot, wet Vijay summer, I've been looking for another excuse to spend time with a game from this design school, and nothing looked more fascinating or more challenging to me than Comanchería, the rise and fall of the Comanche Empire. Even more so because this tragic, complex, and multi-century collision of indigenous and colonial forces happened not far from where I live in space and time. And the aftermath is still being lived, if we're being honest. That feels a lot different than pushing Rajas and Emirs around the board in the 1200s. This is a lot to unpack and weigh. For purposes of this preview, I'm focusing on the era as presented inside the box, which is plenty on its own. Here's what I know so far. Comanchería covers a 175-year arc that traces the fortunes of the Numina, as they called themselves, or the Comanche, as most know them. At their apex, they ran an area about the size of Texas. Over the course of 4 eras, you play solitaire as the Comanche leadership. As the decades advance, the 4 modules progress in difficulty as the Comanche fight to hang on in a world that's closing in around them. I'm right now working my way through the tutorial and setup for the first era, which spans the years 1700 to 1749. Like right now I'm looking at a massive board with several regions. The Upper Arkansas, Llano Estesado, Palo Duro Canyon, Lower Arkansas, Red River, Rio Grande, and Brazos, Colorado. These are all grouped in a web of connected locations that can be subjugated, raided, or defended by any of that era's forces. Unconnected to any of the regions sits a simple dark gray circle, simply titled the Reservation. In this introductory scenario, bison counters are plentiful, and so are the encampments of nearby enemy tribes. It also looks like there's going to be static with the Spanish before long, too, and to the south of them, there are the Mexicans. Real events of the day show up in the development deck. For the setup, I've drawn cards for a war with the Apache, an alliance with the Utes, and a card showing how the War of Spanish Succession is going to ripple onto the board. Now, this is a solo game, so designer Joel Toppin built a very detailed and procedural enemy bot system that dictates decisions and actions for Spanish, Mexicans, hostile tribes, Texans, and eventually the U.S. Army. I've been told that a lot of the crunch is learning how to manage this part correctly. So, as this version of the year 1700 dawns, the Comanche have 1 Comanchería counter on the map in the Upper Arkansas. Comanchería counters mark areas where the Comanche exist in significant numbers. On the right half, tied into these counters, is a big display that zooms in on what and who is currently at your disposal in each Comanchería. So in my starting encampment, looks like the Comanche have some horses, a few 2-strength bands, and a war leader. But this isn't a pure war game that's driven primarily by unit stats and their ability to move, supply, attack, defend. The overall resilience of Comanche society is a garden you also have to tend. The Comanchería displays have tracks that mark the current effectiveness of both your civil and wartime headmen. You've got one of each. Now, this picture deepens with the game's tech tree, a culture deck with 8 kinds of cards, each with 3 levels of advancement. So for my tutorial playthrough, I chose a trade card that's going to make it easier for the Comanche to get their hands on some guns. Whether it's a history or a fantasy game, this is usually my first instinct when learning. When in doubt, strap up. I'll figure out the value of the subtler upgrades later. As for what's next, piece the shit out of me. I'm on page 3 of the 24-page tutorial walkthrough. The formal rules are a separate 24 pages, but I'm liking the designer's approach so far for getting you through the setup and pausing to explain key concepts along the way from the main book. Next, I'll be learning how to manage the game's phases as the Comanche hunt, move, trade, raid, and, if I do my job as a rookie player, start to assert themselves as the Lords of the Plains. Next up, an interview with Robin Cruddas of War Cradle Studios, who is one of the designers of Mix Up Fairy Tales, a new family game done in conjunction with the British Library exhibition. I joined Robin and Breakup Gaming Society contributor Walton Wood to learn about the game's co-op concept and what it was like using the British Library's deep archives of period fairy tale illustrations to unite multiple generations in storytelling, strategy, and laughter. That talk went like this. Hello, players and families. Welcome to Breakup Gaming Society Special Chat. I am your host, Lord Chief Raka number 1, or Nate if you prefer, here with our frequent contributor, Walt. What's up, Walt?
Yo.
And a guest we're excited about. We are talking to Robin Cruddas, who is on the design team, a new game called Mix Up Fairy Tales from War Cradle Studios and done, as I understand it, in conjunction with the British Library. Robin, welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
Borderline spectacular.
Brilliant.
One of the things we want to do is talk about Mix Up Fairy Tales, which let me see if I've done enough reading to sort of pitch it, because one thing we'd like to do is talk about the concept of the game, what it's about, and how it plays. As I understand it, Mix Up Fairy Tales is seats up to 6 players. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's right.
And it's made for families to essentially craft a cooperative narrative that is made up of elements of 8 famous fairy tales. And along the way, Goldilocks can find herself in situations from Puss in Boots, et cetera, as they play cards. And in the game, which is designed to include players, I think, as young as 6.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. It's a cooperative family card game, inspired by kind of the artwork and the fairy tales from the British Library's collections. And it's exactly as you said. It's a game where you essentially start with one well-known fairy tale, and then as gameplay proceeds, the story changes. It gets mixed up. It gets subverted, essentially. Every time it's a player's turn, they will have different story moments from any of the other fairy tales, and they'll kind of place them on the story in front of them, and it will change things up. So you'll start off with something well known, and it will become absurd and silly and hysterical as you kind of go along. And very much we had kind of families in mind when we designed this. That being kind of the target audience for fairy tales, really. And we play tested it, and with our own kids and things like that as well. And they were absolutely in fits of hysterics as you say. Goldilocks is suddenly being pushed into an oven, or the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk is suddenly wearing great grandmother's clothes and things like that. It just, all the stories, you lay them out, and they're all quite sensible, but the fun and the joy of the game is just seeing kind of like the absurd kind of combinations that can come up.
And if I remember correctly, the game encourages people, is it between turns or rounds, to every time the story sort of shifts and includes a new mixed up element, that you read the new story from beginning to end?
Yes, and it's not a very long story. I think essentially the row of cards in front of you, you'd have 9 cards. So essentially, it's a story told in 3 sentences. Is the idea. So it doesn't take long to read those out, but that's it. That's kind of the fun and of like having everybody kind of like do it. And we've had some games where there's been one person who's kind of like been the narrator, and they've kind of gotten a little bit excited and dusted off their acting skills to kind of pronounce the latest changes to the ongoing narrative. And sometimes whoever's playing the card wants to be able to kind of like tell that story because they've been saving that card because they think it'll be particularly funny or whatever. That's the core mechanic and at the heart of the game. But you also actually are trying to achieve some scoring as you go along. So you have some challenge cards. So all the cards, I should say, as well as having kind of a wonderful piece of art, again, inspired from the British Library's collection, and a little snippet of a story, a little kind of like moment, whether it's a big bad wolf or, they lived happily ever after. There is also kind of like a few symbols on those cards. So Hansel and Gretel might have, some hero icons on them, whereas the big bad wolf would have a wolf icon. At the end of every player's turn, they will play a couple of cards, change and mix up that story. You then see whether or not any of the symbols laid out on the 9 cards in front of you match any of the symbols on the challenge cards at the top. So a card might have kind of the deep dark woods, a monster, and a hero. And if those 3 icons are representing a thing, then you as a team have scored that particular challenge card. And at the end of the game, which is when one of your decks runs out, you essentially add up the number of challenge cards you've got. And some of those are worth more than others. So some of them are harder to achieve. They are golden. So we like the link to kind of like golden eggs and things like that. So you as a team kind of have to work together. There's a little bit of strategy there about, do you try and work and try and score those high scoring cards, those gold cards, before your deck runs out, or do you just try and get the easier cards and get like a solid score under your belt? And again, it's just another way to get people talking. That's one of the hallmarks for us for kind of cooperative games, is that the players are interacting and working together. And they do that by talking and reading the story out each time is just another way to kind of like get everybody involved with what's going on and what's changed and things like that.
So the scoring, that's entirely collaborative. It's not players competing like to score an individual challenge card for themselves.
Yep. You're all on the same team. And essentially at the end of it, you will kind of like add up your score and see how well you've done, whether you get top marks and you're like a master chronicler or you're an expert storyteller. It's just a little kind of like way that players can then go like, that was quite cool. If we do it again, should we try and get the next level? So the more points you can amass, and you amass those points by scoring these challenge cards, the better you've done as a team, but you're all working together.
Curious to know, as you tried this with your family and whatever playtesters were about, where did you see people gravitate most? Was it the desire to tell the stories, or did people get really invested in mastering the challenge aspect?
We saw both. Kind of the story of the game's development, if you don't mind indulging me. Ziz Simones and I were kind of like co-creators of this, and we essentially just had the opportunity to work with the British Library. War Cradle Studios is part of Wayland Games, who have got quite close links with the British Library, and the British Library were putting on a fairy tale exhibition. And we'd been involved and had sponsored previous exhibitions, but this was a tie-in card game that uses the artwork and kind of like the stories that are going to be featured in the British Library's exhibition. We started by just indulging ourselves looking at all the artwork from the British Library, and we used the images there from our favourite fairy tales, Aladdin, Red Riding Hood, Jack and the Beanstalk, and we constructed a little bit of a card deck. And it was literally just kind of like moments and elements of the story stitched together to kind of like tell a story, and we used those along. We play tested like several different designs. We played lots of games that we kind of like brought in from home, and we had lots of different ideas, but there was nothing kind of definitive at that point. And I literally just took the cards home with me, like this little kind of mocked up deck of cards. I kind of had them. I was looking at them on my my dining table. So my kids are kind of 10 and 7. I've got 2 girls, and they literally just came home. I was kind of like making dinner, and they're like, "Daddy, what's what's all this?" And I sort of said, it's a thing I'm looking at for work. And then kind of like unprompted, I just started playing with the cards. There was no kind of like rules or anything at that point. They just kind of like did what I guess like comes naturally, and they just like picked them up and started playing with them. And I kind of was watching them as they were doing it, and they were just kind of laying the cards out because they recognized the stories. They've had them read to them at bedtime plenty of times, and they were laughing away as that suddenly it was. The big bad wolf is suddenly chasing Goldilocks, or the 3 little pigs are stealing the golden goose from the giant in the clouds, and they were just having fun. And I think that was the moment when I really thought this is is what essentially became the kind of the core mechanic of the game, and went back to work with it, and it turned into what we currently have. Ziz kind of like worked very hard on kind of like the scoring elements of it. But what we found is that for younger audiences, the fun is just in the storytelling. Okay, whereas the grown-ups, they really got involved with the kind of the challenge aspect of the cards and how best to kind of score that. And we found that throughout the rest of our play testing. So, when there were family with younger kids, actually just turning over those cards and telling funny stories was in and of itself a fun game. Whereas with some grown-ups, you really saw some sort of strategies kind of like being talked about and developed, and lots of, don't play that card yet because we want to score that one and we want to do that in this order and things like that. But even then, there are some grown-ups who are just like, I just want to push Goldilocks into an oven. And so they were trying to engineer these moments as well. So I think it's a sort of game where whether you want to approach it from just a fun, absurd, let's just have, it's a short game at the end of the day. It only takes 15 minutes or so. Let's see what hilarity we can have. Or whether or not you're like, no, I'm going to try and get the highest score I can. It kind of caters to both of that. And we saw that through playtesting. And we're delighted with either outcome.
You hit on something very important, which I noticed in games that have multi-generational appeal. For example, I'm thinking of games we've played of, for example, Carcassonne. Mm-hmm. And it absolutely has the same thing you described. The adults can completely get wound up in the placement of your people and the very subtle and sometimes nasty scoring game. But at the same time, the kids can be at the table because it's just fun to lay the tiles properly and helping build that world. And those two things can comfortably exist side by side. And it sounds like having a good segment of the target market under your roof was an advantage.
Oh, absolutely. They really help. They helped me out anyway. They were just having fun. I think they were just playing, and at the end of the day, that's what that's the heart of all games, right? It's essentially another way to kind of play. And they did that kind of unprompted, so I kind of knew that there was something in the cards already. They had that kind of like that value of play intrinsically in them. They're beautiful kind of like artwork on them. They're telling very well-known stories. They just kind of like intuitively lend themselves to that kind of storytelling mechanic. And I say, when the girls just kind of like shuffled the cards up and they were just laying them out one at a time, they were laughing away. They thought it was the funniest thing. And it was absurd, and they did that, and then they reshuffled it, and they did it again. Essentially, like, that's one of the target audiences you had, and that's one of the things that they clearly wanted to do. So instead of kind of like fighting them, and no, you're not doing, like, if that's what you want to do, then let's make that the heart of the game. And that is the core mechanics of the game are exactly what those girls were doing, just with a little bit more structure, and then with a kind of like a scoring system placed on top of that. Again, to keep the older generation, I guess, but even kind of like, teenagers and things like that, it gives them a little bit more meat on the bones there.
I think it's really interesting and wonderful that your own children were able to make that kind of contribution to the game. I've seen lots of really fun things come out of collaboration between a designer and their child or children. So I think that's just a really fascinating little piece of lore about your game. My question, I saw on the site that those like the story element cards, I guess, are numbered. Are they meant to go in order of 1 to 9? Is that sort of like the grammar or the structure of the story that everyone's telling together?
Yes. So they, and actually from the very beginning, they were numbered 1 to 9. The idea being that you kind of have a storyline in front of you with kind of like, once upon a time, it's on the left-hand side, and happily ever after, or whatever is your particular ending, is number 9. So that just whenever you pick up a card, you know exactly whereabouts in the story it should go. I'm not sure if you've seen the kind of like the children's books whereby they're like little flip books, and you kind of have like whether it's like lots of different kind of like animals, and you've got the front half of one animal and the back half of another, and you kind of flip them around, and you can create all sorts of kind of like funny looking beasts, but the idea is that they always kind of like meet in the middle. So whether it's the back half of a crocodile and the front half of a lion or whatever. there's lots of kind of like different variations of that. That was kind of the idea of mix-up fairy tales, in that you would just take a story, but then you would chop it up into 3 sentences. And again, those 3 sentences each are made up of 3 different cards. And then no matter what card you pop in what slot, it always kind of flows, it always kind of stitches together.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of the idea that we had, and worked very hard with our editors and to kind of like make work. But that was the fun of it.
No, that's fantastic. I saw on the page that part of this was the motivation was to get kids reading, keep them reading, get them interested in fairy tales, which is admirable on its own. But I really like the way that you baked in also teaching them about story structure in a very simple, accessible way, which I see many self-proclaimed story games that give the players absolutely no support on that whatsoever. So I think that's a very smart choice and something I like a lot about this concept.
Oh, thank you. I think, and it's something that I think the British Library are obviously very keen on as well. As part of their exhibition, one of the things that we've also done is we've created a kind of a bespoke version of this, which has larger cards for use within the exhibition. And some of the other, I guess the bonus bit of that is there are some blank cards there as well. So that actually, if people want to go and kind of recreate their own favorite fairy tale, or they want to modify it or something like that, they can do so. And it's kind of like those kind of dry white marker ideas. They can actually create their own kind of like story parts to it. So you've kind of got that writing part of it and that kind of creative storytelling part of it as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, because I also remember reading about an edition that includes blank cards. Is that what you're talking about now?
It is, yeah. So that's part of the British Library's fairy tale exhibition. So anybody lucky enough to kind of go down there will literally get to interact with a version of this game. Slightly bigger cards, and part of that is an opportunity to then essentially create your own fairy tale stories or your own cards that could be shuffled up and kind of added to the mix.
Excellent. So yeah, if I want to get maybe insert some wind in the willows in there, I can.
Exactly that. Yeah.
I'd love to hear some stories of surprises, and I'd love to know, as you put this game as it formed in people's hands, surprises or insights came from. I also want to know the same thing about what it was like raiding the British Library, because of course the period art is beautiful. I assume a lot of it came out of original prints and books from the archives. And I'd love to know what that was like and what you found in there, either in playtesting or while digging through stacks.
I mean, the stacks were great. I mean, a lot of it is kind of available digitally, and we were just, I think we probably spent like an afternoon just gawking at whether it's like Arthur Ransom artwork or any of these kind of like original prints. There are kind of like proper like wood carvings and all sorts there, and we essentially just gathered a whole range of stuff. And I think that was kind of like part of the joy of kind of putting these things together. A lot of kind of card games have got very uniform artwork. It's usually a single creator so the style of the card games is very uniform. But actually, I think what we found was that the more diverse and the more eclectic the artwork became for our stories, or ones we were kind of collecting for these fairy tales, that almost kind of like had a thing in and of itself. I think had we tried to limit ourselves to a single artist, I think there would have been certain stories and certain fairy tales that we just wouldn't have been able to source like that artwork from. But I think we would have just kind of lost that. It's a celebration really of that whole kind of like period of kind of like artwork, and it's very vibrant, very very characterful. I think what really helps to make the cards look so special. So that was an absolute joy, and we kind of put together bits and bobs best we can. But then there would have been a particular story element that we just struggled to find a piece of artwork for. At which point we would have worked in with our contacts in the British Library, who were amazing. And what they would essentially do is go away and scour the archives, as it were, because they knew more about what artwork may exist in whatever volume than we did. And when they would find a certain bit, go, hey, what about this bit here? We'd be like, that's amazing. And they, scan that and give us a high resolution version of that we could then send to our graphics department and kind of have laid out on cards. So it was very much kind of like a collaboration with the archive team from the British Library in sourcing this stuff. So we'd find some stuff, we said something like that, and they would go away. It's like, that's okay, but have you seen this piece of artwork from this other artist, which we think might be even better? And the answer was almost always like, wow, that's amazing. Yes, we'd love to use that. And they're like, yep, great, off you go. Use that then. So yeah, like delving through the kind of the archive images and all the help that the British Library team were able to support there was fantastic, and it was a lot of fun. You were saying, are there any other kind of like anecdotes or kind of like things that we learned from playtesting? The other kind of like big anecdote I have from the playtesting actually was Christmas dinner. So I was spending Christmas dinner at my in-laws, and we had the whole family kind of around. And so once everybody's kind of like stuffed full of turkey in that kind of like post-Christmas lull, again, one of the kids say, "Should we play the game that the fairy tale game?" I'm like, because I had it with me. I was doing a little bit of work over the holidays. And so I literally play tested it with the whole family. So at that point, we kind of had grandparents and grandchildren all around the same kind of dining table. And again, we had some, very kind of like everyone was chuckling along as a parade of villains from Giants and Ogres were wearing grandmother's clothing, eating everyone's porridge inside a gingerbread house. Goldilocks was blowing down houses and Cinderella was climbing beanstalks. It was kind of like a very kind of like light-hearted, but again, everybody was kind of chuckling away for different reasons over it, which was just, reaffirmed that it's a game for families primarily, whether that's kind of, grandchildren and grandparents or, parents and their kids. Everybody gets something out of it.
Walt, I think if you ever do Christmas playtesting of anything, Walt, I want to be invited now.
Plane tickets on you, the turkey's on me.
That sounds great.
What really piques my interest is knowing do you have a favorite card? Do you have a find in the course of looking for the right illustrations where you just wanted to look at the card all day and that made it on to into the game and you still like looking at it?
Ooh, whether there's a favorite card, I think my favorite kind of like selection of cards probably come from Aladdin. If I'm being honest, and a lot of that I think is because in the kind of development of this, my understanding of Aladdin is very heavily informed from the Disney adaptation. But it was only kind of like as I started kind of like looking at all the illustrations and things that was coming up that I kind of really got under the skin and I guess the thing I learned here was that Aladdin is a story essentially set in China, not in kind of like sort of some Persian city. It is one of the tales told in the Arabian Nights, but it's actually sort of like a story set in and around China. So actually the artwork we have here is kind of like it's much closer to the original setting. And I don't know, I for some reason that it kind of like it fascinated me because it's not what I was expecting when I typed in Aladdin into kind of like the search engines in the British Library, and you have a look at it, you're like, I don't understand what's going on. That was my not necessarily favorite card, but favorite sets of cards come from that, mostly because it was so enlightening, I suppose, to and I learned something in the process of all this.
Well, that's a bonus for me because we also found what in your explorations was also your biggest surprise during the work with the British Library. So that's awesome.
Oh, there we are. I've preempted the question. Brilliant.
Absolutely. And, in my background reading about the game, it says that there's the exhibition and the game, and also looks like an effort to make copies available and or extend play into schools.
Yes, as it's got that great kind of cooperative element to it. So I think it suits very well to kind of like school environments as well. And as you say, there's definitely that kind of simple story structure kind of learning of it. And I think, and then just like reading, it's like anything you can do to kind of like improve reading is something that, delighted to be part of.
Yeah, I noticed that even in complex board games, that it always helps, me at least, narrating it is incredibly valuable. And sometimes that'll default to a roll at the table if somebody just sort of like a play-by-play person would at a sporting match, sort of talk about the game state and what just happened and what happens next. That skill of processing and representing is valuable for anybody.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Whether it's communication skills are, key to, everyday life, but games in particular, as a kind of comprehension and reading, anything like games can do to help people, I'm all for.
Robin, if there's anything about the game that we didn't touch on but should have, the floor's yours.
Oh, sure. I think one of the things that's quite fun about fairy tales is that actually they are a bit grim in places, right? There are some bad stuff can happen to the bad guys. And I think one of the things that was most fun in kind of development, I think we all kind of sat down and agreed that when we were looking at kind of what our list of kind of good guys and bad guys are, we all looked at Goldilocks and agreed Goldilocks is a villain. There's just no two questions about it. She comes in, she is breaking and entering, stealing everybody's food, breaking all their furniture. She's definitely the villain. I think probably my favorite card is Goldilocks, the naughtiest of all children, because it then just creates the funniest combinations. In my opinion, your mileage may vary, and to the point where we have had games, I think I've said before, where people have literally their goal has been to engineer the demise of Goldilocks, whether or not that's her falling off a beanstalk or being pushed into an oven, or being scared and chased away. But there is that kind of grim humor that lives at the heart of a lot of fairy tales. And I think we didn't shy away from that. That is just, those are the stories. That's kind of how they're told. Bad things happens to bad people. Fairy tales are there to kind of teach children about morals and what's right and wrong. So we felt that was important to kind of maintain.
Interesting to know that Goldilocks got such mileage as both a villainous and it sounds like a source of drama and comedy too. I've never thought about, but yeah, it is. She's sort of obnoxious when you think about her.
Yeah, she's the protagonist, but she's not a good person.
No, not at all. Spoiled little brat she is.
Yeah, what are you doing rolling about in three people's beds and giving them ratings? That's not your lane, Goldilocks.
Yeah, the three bears were clearly the victims in the story.
It's very, very different where I live, where bears help themselves to my garbage, but that's another regional problem for another time. And it looks like right now, if people would love to try this with their family, they can go get it at Wayland Games.
Yes, so the Mix Up Fairy Tales is available from Wayland Games, from the web store, or from the British Library shop and their website. So you can get that from either.
Wonderful. Well, it's a beautiful game and worthy, and this was fun for me to learn about, and I want to thank you for having Walt and I along, and just want to congratulate both the British Library and the War Cradle Studios team for putting together this lovely thing, and wish you the best of luck with it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we had lots of fun making it. It was an absolute team effort, but it was loads of fun. And yeah, we hope that everybody who gets a chance to kind of have a go has as much fun playing it as we did making it.
So once again, this has been Nate, aka the Lord Chief Rocket #1, and contributor Walt of Breakup Gaming Society, here with Robin Cruddas on the design team for Mix Up Fairy Tales. Robin already told you where to check it out, so thanks to all. Like we say at the end of a show, Robin, we appreciate your time, and may you fight long and well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, guys.
We once again thank Robin for making time to tell us about the process behind what could be your family's next evening get-together. Lastly, here's another installment in my ongoing personal retrospective on the influence that Fantasy Flight's catalog had on our family, our friendships, our very definition of what a game night was. This time, I'm diving back into Chaos in the Old World. Or, as the commercial jingle went, Chaos in the Old World. I think that was pretty catchy. Chaos in the Old World could have single-handedly ruined gaming for me for years. Not before or since have I experienced a four-seater, or a quartet of players like the one we had, where we all learned together, improved at matching levels of interest, or created a multi-year series of such well-matched duels. That's the juice right there. Drink it deeply and you may find yourself spoiled for other flavors. I didn't realize that by the time I'd finally gotten good at playing Nurgle, the Plague God, our group would be done. I still remember the night. We were bombed out of our gourds after a good meal at a restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking one of Portland's rivers at dusk. We had them clear the table, kept ordering drinks, and set up the board right there on the white tablecloth. Staff were mystified. During the home stretch of that game, I saw a use of the power card that I'd never seen before. I usually shied away from it because it was the most expensive to play. The stench of death. I used it to sprint past everybody at the critical moment, dominating the last 2 turns. Barring miracles, it was the last time I'll share a table with those 3 people again. Nurgle had a power card for that too. All things decay. So, some of you out there may have been lucky enough to have a group and own this box and play it. Others might be asking, who the hell is Nurgle? So, Nurgle is one of the 4 ruinous powers from the Warhammer universe. He's a fixture in both the fantasy and futuristic versions. He's a jolly sort who likes covering the world in diseases, but his earthly ambitions often clash with the other ruinous powers, who are jealous and all hate each other. Khorne, the blood god, Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure, and Tzeentch, the changer of ways. Chaos in the old world takes place in the Warhammer fantasy universe. In this Eric Lang masterpiece, everything in the world of humans is about to simultaneously become a target for demonic corruption and subject to massive collateral damage as this quartet of rivals lock in an asymmetrical duke 'em out. Cities will burn. The chanting of cultists and the howls of the displaced will be heard from the smallest hamlet to the tallest towers in the land. Vicious, grasping entertainers will rise to positions of authority. Nurgle, Khorne, Slaanesh, and Tzeentch are all in a race to corrupt the kingdoms on the map and win via one of 2 victory mechanisms. Either have the most points on the victory point track at the end of the game, or be the first to reach the last notch on a separate dashboard containing your demon god's threat dial. If you max your dial, you can win before the final VP tally even happens. Now, across the map are all the kingdoms of humans. A north-south strip of juicy holdings offers the most points for corruption, but adjoining areas dangle the promise of smaller rewards for less hotly contested ground. Each turn you get an allotment of points that you spend round-robin on either dispatching figures to the map, those cultists and demons, or playing power cards into one of the kingdom area slots. Now, each new card or figure that arrives on the map forces you to recalculate as your opponents commit muscle and magic to their target zones. Are they feinting, simply interfering, or about to arrive in force? This is where the asymmetrical aspect and the puzzle of opportunity cost replicates the dimensions of this colossal battle inside your head. Each player has different tricks at their disposal, different strategies. Khorne, who just needs a constant flow of blood to feel good, can simply try to spread his bloodthirster demons around and use his power cards to increase the likelihood of head cracking. Tzeentch's troops are mostly unremarkable, but they can shower the board with low-cost power cards that don't look like they're doing much until the end run when you realize they've spirited high-scoring warp stones out of your reach and built themselves a point-scoring engine. Slaanesh and Nurgle have troops that can land the occasional blow, but more ways to make combat unattractive or impossible, so they can degrade kingdoms, keep their utility figures alive, and tilt an ailing region their way as the whole kingdom goes down in a rolling curtain of prismatic warp flame. But here's another hitch. Only a total of 2 power cards, that's from across all the players, can be played into a single region on any given turn. Combine this with how the board forces you together, the surprises in the event deck, and all the ways there are to calculate and shave advantage in each kingdom, and you've got a grade A brain burner on your hands. If you're like me and prone to making reactive decisions under pressure in a medium-length strategy game, you'll quickly find yourself overwhelmed and beaten up. By the 6th or 7th play, I'd finally cured myself of sprinkling stuff all over the board and hoping for the best. By mid-game, you are going to have to make some tough calls about which 2 or 3 fights you're really willing to have. Chances are, one of your other 3 enemies want those too. What plays out as the demons tangle and everyone maneuvers with their cards is absolutely incredible. And if you want another wrinkle, when a human kingdom falls, it gets scored at the end of the round and then becomes worthless. How many of your figures are stranded there doing nothing? Moving them takes points, so you have to play for future position all the time. And this is all even harder when you don't play the game right. So I took Nurgle's chair in our early games and never won. Ever. It was really frustrating. I was never even a factor when all the big takes and points were being taken down the final stretch. It was one of the few times that I ever started reading strategy guides. I usually don't believe in this kind of thing, but I had to find out what the hell was going on. It seemed so off. Nothing I tried changed the outcome. So, as it turns out, we'd been playing it for months before I realized we were advancing the threat dials too quickly. Now, this compresses the proper development of the struggle and guarantees that Nurgle, who needs a lot of points on the VP track in the later parts of the game, would never win. At least, not the way I played him. But I stuck on Nurgle's throne for the next several years. Sometimes we'd talk about randomizing the roles, but we always settled back onto our regular perches. There was passing silly talk about the expansion that added a 5th player, the Skaven, but we needed that like the Clash needed a saxophonist. So we got about to playing it correctly and found an arena whose familiarity and even late surprises kept us bound in chaos even after our fave friend couple moved to Portland. They came to meet us in Vegas, and chaos in the old world came along. It came to Portland for our final match, too. These were the kind of trips where you'd decide which outfit you were going to wear a second day so you could cram one more game into the duffel. Chaos in the old world would usually come out on these trips once before breakfast and on another evening at least, after a day of foraging and tippling in the many neighborhoods we crossed. After I moved out of the house, things lightened up a bit between my wife and I. The only thing I cared about keeping at the time were my clothes, books, and games. Before I cleaned out my former home's game shelf, I asked her if there were any titles she wanted to keep. She chose well. Fury of Dracula, Cyclades, Merchants and Marauders, and Chaos in the Old World all remained at the old address, with its taped-up corner and banged-up cultist figures with the finials snapped off their staffs and littering the bottom of the box. I went mad the following summer and bought a dump in Starkville during COVID summer, record Colorado home price summer, protest and riot summer, wildfire smoke often making it impossible to keep the sustaining habit of walks. I dug in for 5 years of a slow-motion collapse that finally registered months after I hit the ground. All my bad choices and bad breaks finally got on the phone and started collaborating. During the warm months, I went on benders twice a week and layered in other chemicals as the position of the moon suggested. I packed something dangerous down there with me. The fantasy that a table like yesterday's would ever happen again. At first I thought it would be different if I just owned the box again. It belonged with me because soon I would have 3 people to recreate these duels. It was inevitable. At this time I had all kinds of imaginative flights in my head. I was going to be able to scrape one of the derelict structures on the property's many lots and put a container house/game bunker in there for guests. What I did instead was go broke and watch the southerly winds, sometimes holding at 25 miles an hour and gusting higher for days in the winter, peel off their siding and roofs like an onion while I calculated how low I could keep the thermostat. Holding on to yesterday's fleeting pleasures stunned me, embittered me against all I met. I still owned several dozen thrilling games, but you can't open a box and soul transfer the old days into new pals. Compared to those laughter-filled brawls in the old world, sessions down in Starkville didn't even feel like games. I became impatient, bored with all, withdrew from the rhythms of the town, and then found an equal but categorically different joy in long nights of solo play, a tabula rasa so engrossing that, when in full swing, it erased time and even the faces of the lost. You often get to live your fantasy, but you don't recognize it at the time. Chaos in the old world spread out on a white tablecloth on a beautiful summer night in Portland. It's the montage sequence of the movie. These sequences go fast for a reason. You're triumphant and glutted, about to lose everything else for good. Chaos in the old world is famously out of print and not coming back. A review seems paltry. I only wish for you the longest ride you can take with the crew who will take the time to experience something deeply and can laugh their way through a taxing brawl. What's on the shelf matters less. So, those are all the games. Next are all the beats and rhymes. It's Track of the Week.
Bitch, I kicked it, yup, I kicked it. Come on, you couldn't bang with this if your name was Genghis Khan.
Motherfuckers better let me go ahead and finish this album, warns Kool Keith, aka Dr. Dooom, in the intro to the song No Chorus. The name of this song, he goes on to say, is I don't want the motherfucking chorus. Whatever the arrangements are, we're going to go through. Fuck all the laws. In No Chorus, Dr. Dooom is at his mean, cranky, eccentric best, dishing out cutting observations in hurried lines designed to give young hip-hop acts who think they're going somewhere a nasty reality check.
Big crews don't want it, y'all get it worse. Which one of y'all motherfuckers is waiting for the mic first? I hope your bitch is in the audience, your wife too, that's your fan base. Plus your DJ's in the place, I'm about to boo you, let it be fair. When you come off stage, 90% of the people that came on your guest list ain't gonna be there. A big disappointment when I rub your asshole with a verbal ointment. Rappers acting hard, nervous in the dressing room with a security guard. Groupies standing around with their fucking face frown, looking like fucking Homie the Clown.
Ooh, ouch. This album was part of the late 90s string of indie successes that saw a resurgence for Kool Keith as he rapped as Dr. Dooom or the Octagonacologist or Black Elvis or any of the other nicknames he gave himself during this run. I've been exploring it more and keep landing on the track Housing Authority, which features Motion Man and one of the LP's more potent beats from DJ and producer Cutmaster Kurt, who worked with these two guys a lot.
You bust out your briefcase, you and your wife start the free base, break out your mansion. I'm on the phone with Charlie Manson, with porno tapes jerking hard off the Christie Canyon. Unique converter, witness 20 different Bronx murders.
Ankle strap, home arrest, hanging feet up out the window. I strike the National Guard, the helicopter light. Shaggy and Scooby with Velma Daphne laughing at me. Mystery Machine still a lowered with choosing votes. Miami bass bump, ghetto D, advocated. Spider-Man suction upside down on the elevator. Porno star.
So at this point, I've got a taste for more Cutmaster Kurt beats and want to know more about Motion Man too. Motion Man showed up throughout the years on my indie hip-hop feeds, usually as a guest feature. Keith liked working with him because he recognized a purebred microphone original when he saw one. So what else did Motion Man do? Outside of the guest verses, the best piece of evidence I found is 2002's LP, Clearing the Field, also produced by Cutmaster Kurt. Kool Keith shows up on this one, as does Bay Area gunslinger Planet Asia and Biz Markie, rest in peace. Kurt's punchy sampling style and efficient atmospherics seem perfect for Motion Man's tireless loop-de-loops and artful taunts. My favorite by far is the track Loose Cannon.
But wait, I'm a loose cannon out the gate. Who's handling your fate? Cut master Kurt, dismantle in the crate. Going around, partner, bring it back. Rattle in the play. Yeah. But wait, I'm a loose cannon out the gate. Who's handling your fate?
And it's at this point I'm wondering why Motion Man didn't make a bigger splash. He's witty, fierce, confident, and technically grounded. Every time you think one of his verses is gonna come unglued or get too silly, he reels off a bunch of deadly compounds or toggles at speed between sung phrases, off-kilter denotative imagery, unrhymed payoffs, tight schemes, and zingy metaphors.
Get up, get up. I mean distinguished to never share my old English. My style distinguished, you hot kids feeling fiendish. Open mouth, feed this. Still like Jason Gilden as I save the children with open arms. Come and visit dad as I send my sons away with a poetically filled notepad. There's your resume, return it to me, keep it holy. Sabbath today, we'll break bread and keep it federal. As I send you back up in the world with new material. As I show up in the form of an underground lyrical construction worker. Lyrical blueprints, forcing out new hints.
Now, if you like this approach, Motion Man, Kurt, and guests pulled this kind of thing off again and again and again across the whole LP. Once again, that LP is called Clearing the Field. It's Motion Man's solo LP from 2002, I think. When I found it, I had a few days that made me remember that what was waiting for me in my likes lit queue on my YouTube music was like those 2 or 3 post-Christmas mornings as a kid when you open your eyes in bed and the first thing you remember is that you have a pile of new toys to spend the whole morning with in whatever order you want, and there's no school. Cool Keith, Motion Man, and Cutmaster Kurt also got together for another full-length LP called Masters of Illusion, and if you want one of Motion Man's better-known late 90s one-offs, check out a track called Terrorist he did with the innovative Russian alt-hip-hop heavyweight DJ Vadim. Guaranteed to entertain. That's the end of episode 115. Looking ahead, Walt and I have some killer TTRPG interviews booked for May. On top of that, I'm replaying and taking pretty deep notes on my favorite solo games from 2023 and 2024. I also have the Fantasy Flight retrospective will also continue. I got friend of the show, Noisy Andrew, on the line about his experience with Citadels as the next part of that series of throwback talks. I also want to play SETI again, and the solo map-making puzzle game Cartographers is still waiting for attention. I hope you come back and see how much of this I am actually able to cover in the next 2 weeks. And one parting reminder, give Doghouse Riley, our show sponsor, a visit and snag one of their clever teas. Links in the show description. Other than that, look for episode 116 on May 15th. And as always, may you fight long and well.
Go around, partner, bring it back. Rattle in the place. That's right. And now back up on the scene, big posing at the photo session. Huge talk up in the magazine. Amuse talk, boast and brag of fiend. Illusion master of the switchboard on his board. The funky rednecks